Hi, Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and this is it, folks. This is the final episode in my series on extremely nitpicking Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings series. This is going to cover Disc 2 of the extended version of The Return of the King, and there's actually not as much in this one as you might think, even though there's a lot of stuff in the movie that isn't, great from a standpoint of adapting the book, but there are still several things in here that are kind of weird. The first one I have is not really a coherence problem exactly, which is usually what I'm doing with these, but it is kind of a why type of thing. Early on, we get this scene where Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli have just left the paths of the dead. They're standing on the banks of, I'm assuming, the Anduin River near its outlet to, the sea, and they're waiting on the Corsair ships, and of course they're basically threatening the Corsairs, that they can't go any further and whatever, and the Corsairs are laughing about it, and Aragorn softly says to Legolas to shoot a warning shot past the bosun's ear, and Gimli takes his axe and nudges the bow, throwing off Legolas's shot, making it so that he actually hits somebody. And it's, there's nothing internally incoherent about this, but you do have to wonder, what is Gimli's purpose here? Is he just trying to provoke the Corsairs to make the fight happen, which they all know is going to happen anyway? I don't understand why this happens, other than trying to throw humor in it, which it's not even that humorous. Next we get a scene where, after the encounter with Shelob, Frodo manages to escape her tunnels and ends up getting ambushed by Gollum, who tries to choke him, but Frodo manages to actually kind of turn the tables on him, and Gollum, of course, tries to use the excuse of, "It wasn't us, the Precious made us do it," and Frodo lets him go and basically says, "I have to destroy it for both our sakes," and you could tell that what he's done is he's bought Gollum's line that Gollum is on his side, but just, was controlled by the ring, basically. There's two problems with this. One is there's no good reason to trust him at this point. And even if you did trust him, given that even if he wants to help you, he's going to be manipulated and controlled by the ring to the point of having you murdered by a giant spider, there's still no reason to trust you. So why on earth is Frodo just letting him go as if, okay, well, everything's back to being okay now? It's just, oh man, that is some painful naivete. Next, we have one where the riders of Rohan are on their way to Minas Tirith, and they're kind of camped out waiting for some scouts, apparently, and they're all just kind of waiting around and until somebody comes back and tells them kind of what's going on up ahead, and then they prepare to ride. Eowyn and Merry are having a conversation, and Eowyn is just not wearing a helmet. Just not wearing a helmet. Anybody who got anywhere close would be able to tell that she's Eowyn, or at least a female, and not a guy. And she's supposed to be in disguise. She's supposed to be, in the book, even Merry doesn't know who she is. But, she's supposed to at least be in disguise for the rest of the riders of Rohan so that they don't, know who she is and report her to Theoden. And she sure doesn't want to get seen by Theoden. She's probably far enough away from Theoden that she would, be able to put the helmet back on before he approached or something. But why would you take that risk? That's just crazy. We get another scene from the Siege of Gondor where there's a lot of fighting going on, and eventually the bad guys get into the lower levels. They break through the gates and they start, going through and invading the actual city. And we get Gandalf saying, make sure everybody moves up to the upper levels. And we see women and children running around. And I'm just left wondering, why are these people not already way up high, as safe as they could possibly be? Because there is no way in the siege conditions that they're in that they wouldn't have already done that. Why would you have left anybody low enough that they would be in danger if the gate was breached or anything like that? In the book, they didn't just move the women and children to the higher levels. Most of the women and children left the city entirely and went somewhere else. Here, they're just like, we're just going to stay in the lower levels until, we're going to have to run literally for our lives and have orcs at our heels. Wow, that's just bad. When the riders of Rohan finally arrive, and we get I have to say, one of my favorite scenes in The Return of the King, and even in the entire trilogy, we get, of course, Theoden rallying the troops and all this stuff, but then we also see the orcs getting ready for, to repel the charge, basically. And our favorite ugly orc, I think he's named Gothmog, but I'm not sure about that, basically says pikes in front, archers in the rear, or something like that. And then all these orcs get up in the front, and they're carrying these pikes, but the pikes are like maybe as long as a longsword. They're not actually very long. I mean, they're no taller than the orcs themselves. If you're going to have a pike, and the point of it is to be anti-cavalry, you need a very long spear, not just this thing that, that's no longer than your own body. That's not going to be very effective at stopping a cavalry charge. Why even have the pikes in front in the first place if that's all you've got? That's not going to have any effect whatsoever. You might as well just say archers in front and be like, well, they're going to get killed anyway. Just shoot until they get, up to you and ride you over. The pikes do nothing. You don't, at least in the Battle of Helm's Deep, Saruman's Uruk-hai actually had legit, 10, 15 foot long pikes that you would actually stop a cavalry charge with that if you used it properly. But Mordor apparently doesn't have that kind of technology yet, which is bizarre. Once the Rohirrim actually get into the battle and start chopping down enemies, they end up retreating behind a wall of Oliphants, and then we get a lot of chaos with the Oliphants tearing up a whole lot of Rohirrim, just sweeping whole swaths of horses and riders aside. But we start to get, some pushback from the riders, and in particular we get this scene where Eowyn takes Merry's sword and has him hold the reins, and she goes through and she takes her swords and cuts both, sides of the legs of this Oliphant, and as a result, the Oliphant actually falls down. That Oliphant is huge. I mean, their legs are the size of large tree trunks, and their hides cannot be very thin. We're talking about elephants that are oversized. The hide on that thing has got to be basically armor. In fact, we see some of the Rohirrim actually, hitting these Oliphants with bows and spears and all these other things, and they're not stopping them. They just don't seem to care. But somehow her sword strikes, which are, maybe slightly more powerful because she's riding a horse, which gives her a little more momentum. But, she's just swinging a sword at the leg, and then somehow apparently she cuts the Achilles tendon or something. I don't know exactly how that's supposed to work, but there's no way that would have actually happened. Her little swords, and it's not that they're, bad swords or anything, but you would need so much power behind that to cut through enough hide and then cut the tendon such that the Oliphant would actually crumble to the ground over it. It's just not happening. Even the strongest man in the world on the fastest horse in the world with the sharpest sword in the world probably ain't doing that. Now we return to Frodo and Sam, and it actually is Frodo and Sam for the first time in this movie. And Sam, of course, manages to actually reach Frodo and kill the orc that's about to kill Frodo. And Frodo despairs because he thinks the orcs have taken the ring, and Sam says, begging your pardon, but they haven't. And he holds it out for Frodo to grab. Well, to show Frodo, really, not for him to grab. And then Frodo tells him to give him the ring, and Sam gets all reluctant. Now, up to this point in the movie, if you've been watching and paying attention to Frodo's reactions about everything related to the ring, counting, this movie and the movies that came before, what would you expect his reaction to be when Sam doesn't just immediately hand it over and say, okay, here you go? You would expect him to become a raging lunatic. But instead, what happens? He goes, Sam, give me the ring. Like, he's just, like, there's nothing angry there. There's no rage. There's no, you've stolen my thing. There's none of that. He's, at best, he sounds tired and frustrated, and that's a stretch. In fact, I think it's been a long time since I watched the commentary from the extended versions, but I think, if I remember right, the people who were behind this, Peter Jackson, Philippa, and all them, basically said that they were having Frodo be concerned over Sam being corrupted by the ring here. It's just, after all that we've built up to in these movies with the way that Frodo reacts to everything because of the ring, suddenly we get this really, really, really watered down reaction that is not in keeping with any of that. Just, could we at least be consistent with our decisions, guys? I mean, I don't like how they have Frodo act because of the ring in several different places, but if you're gonna go with that line, you need to stick with it. You can't just ignore it suddenly when it's really the one that he would react to the most, because he, A, doesn't actually have the ring, and B, the person who he's expecting to give it to him is not giving it to him. That ought to send him into just absolute blind rage, basically. But no, there's no consistency here. Next, we get to the scene where Gandalf and Aragorn and Éomer and Legolas and Gimli are all talking about what they're going to do next after they've won the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, and we get a bunch of different discussion, but the main thing here is that Gandalf is talking about Frodo and Sam being, trying to get through Mordor, and the fact that there's 10,000 orcs that stand between him and Mount Doom. And he says, I've sent him to his death. And you could tell that he's just like, what have I done? And it's so nutty because, we're talking about Gandalf here. He's been around the company, and he's been around Frodo since the beginning. And the plan has always been to get to Mount Doom, and we know what Mordor is like, and we know that Sauron is building armies. And somehow Gandalf never took this into his calculation when at any point before this, and suddenly it's like, oh no, we're doomed, and it has to be Aragorn that comes in and saves the day and is, at least in the book, Gandalf is actually the one that basically lays out the strategy. It's like, you can either stay here and endure a siege after siege after siege, or you can march to the Black Gate and basically distract Sauron so that Frodo can make it. Here, Aragorn does that, and, this is part of the whole problem of trying to make Aragorn have a character arc. You have to upend so many other things in the movies, and one of those things is Gandalf suddenly becomes an idiot. Okay. Gandalf just gets to be an idiot now so that Aragorn can be the hero. Can they not both just be good and have brains? It's just dumb. But Gandalf not having foreseen this when he's, Gandalf, for crying out loud, is just unacceptable. After Frodo and Sam escape the Tower of Cirith Ungol relatively easily, since they're all, the orcs are all dead, they, of course, end up getting into a group of another bunch of orcs and getting marched almost all the way to the Black Gate. And they have to escape, which, of course, this also happens in the book. And in the book, it's, again, this is one of those where if they just kind of stuck with the way the book does it, it would have worked a lot better. Because in the book, it's really pretty simple. There's a fight that starts, and a bunch of chaos erupts, and they escape in the chaos. They kind of do that in the movie, but there's not that much chaos. When Sam starts fighting with Frodo to create a, chaotic situation, there's a little bit of roughhousing that goes on, and then everything kind of settles down, and there's just not really a lot of chaos going on, and then they just kind of walk out as if, oh, well, no one's watching now. What are you talking about? There's orcs everywhere that aren't engaging in a pitched battle for, right-of-way on a road, that are perfectly capable of just seeing you walk out and nobody's... the first time I saw this in theaters, I was just like, man, that is cringy bad. It utterly fails at what it's trying to do. And all you had to do was do it the way the book did it, and it wouldn't have taken that much more time, and it would have worked and looked so much better. It wasn't that hard, but no, we're just gonna dumb it down and make it absolutely absurd. Skipping way ahead till after, all the ending stuff pretty much, we get to the scene at the Grey Havens where Frodo is about to leave and he hands Sam the Red Book, which we've already seen him writing in it, and it's the same Red Book that Bilbo had. It's, there and back again, A Hobbit's Tale, and The Lord of the Rings. So this is The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings all together. Now, we can imagine that Frodo probably didn't put the appendices in it. We can imagine that Frodo didn't put, everything in there. From the frame of the story, there's some stuff in there that's from Finnegill Kingsrider, probably. There's some other stuff from other parties. But by now, it's more or less the complete tale. And he hands him a book that's like this thick. And we've seen Frodo's handwriting. I mean, he's writing fairly large letters. There ain't no way he fit all of that material. I mean, it would probably be barely big enough to put, Bilbo's own story by itself in there. But he hands Sam this thing that's, just like this. And I'm just like, The Lord of the Rings ain't in there. There is not much writing to be contained in such a small package. There's just no way the physics of that line up. Unless, he was, except for the title page, he was writing in microprint. Just, that you'd have to have a magnifying glass or even a microscope to read. But yeah, I mean, this is the ending, and, even you'd think at this point, we're not paying attention, we're just enjoying the good vibes and everything, but no, there is still stuff to nitpick, and I've got one more. Believe it or not, the very, very final scene of the movie has a nitpick. And again, this is not exactly a coherence problem, but I could not comment on this because it's such a ruination of something that happens in the book. In the book, Frodo, who is unmarried, has no kids, and no living relatives, really, except, arguably the Sackville Bagginses are still around at this point. But there's, no one for him to leave Bag into, and so he leaves it to Sam, and even declares Sam his heir. And so when Sam comes back at the end of the story and says, well, I'm back, he's coming back to Bag End. In this movie, of course, he's not. He comes back to just a respectable little hobbit hole where he lives with Rosie and his kids. And that's, not a problem in and of itself, except it does raise the question, what did Frodo do with Bag End? Is it just sitting there empty for anybody to just, move into as a squatter? Like, who gets Bag End? It's such a easy thing to put in the movie that would have been a touching moment between Sam and Frodo where Frodo leaves it to Sam and Sam is, all thankful and stuff. But even though they cut out all of the scouring of the Shire to save time, they couldn't find time to just do this one little thing that would have, resonated, I think, pretty well with audiences. And even if you hadn't made an explicit scene about it, just him coming back to Bag End, people are smart enough to figure out what that means. And it would have been a, big deal, and it would have been important to the fans, but we didn't get that. It's just, why not? And why is Bag End apparently just unowned now? I mean, it's just, I don't know. I didn't really like it, but that's, maybe the idea was because Frodo doesn't tell Sam he's leaving until he's actually at the Grey Havens. Obviously, therefore, they haven't moved into Bag End, and maybe the idea is they're supposed to move in later because Frodo left a will, and I don't know. But to me, it was just one of those moments that the book version of the ending would have worked perfectly fine, and they changed it for no apparent reason, and it just raises this random question of, Bag End goes to who? So, yeah. Even at the very end of the movie, I'm still finding nitpicks, but hey, we're done. No more nitpicking Peter Jackson's trilogy. Next, I've got to do the videos on details he got right and subtle changes that only book fans would notice. And then after that, I do have to catch up on the request made by an elf friend level patron on details that Peter Jackson got right in the Hobbit trilogy. And I have started watching the Hobbit trilogy, and I've actually found a couple things so far, but I'm not super hopeful about finding a lot on that. So we'll see how that goes. But it'll be coming. It's just going to probably be a while, because I've got to get through 3 movies probably to find enough for one video. At any rate, if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up, share it around. Make sure you subscribe to catch my future content if you like this kind of stuff, and click the bell icon if you're on YouTube to make sure you don't miss any notifications. Follow me on the platform formerly known as Twitter to make sure you catch Tolkien-related trivia questions every week, and check out the other social and support links in the description below. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek, signing out for the Tolkien Lore Channel. Namarie. Thanks to all my channel supporters, especially elf friends Nathan Dufour, Robert Kindling, and Stephen Clayton.